You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, the DC Board of Professional Responsibility found that Rudy Giuliani violated ethics rules in his lawsuits to overturn the 2020 election. Now, these are preliminary findings, so what does that mean?
So what that means is Rudy Giuliani's lawyers will still have an opportunity to contest them, but it feels like those findings are on their way to being the permanent findings. And the question is, what sanction might the DC Bar Council try to impose? And, the prosecutor, so to speak, that is the attorney who's representing the DC Bar Council in this ethics hearing, said the following during the course of the hearing itself. His name is Hamilton Fox, and he said, quote, Rudy Giuliani weaponized his law license to bring a frivolous action to undermine the Constitution, close quote. Let me tell you, in all of my years of practice as a federal prosecutor, I don't think I ever heard an ethical allegation that was quite so dramatic. A lawyer who was barred in D.C. weaponizing his law license, bringing frivolous actions in court in an effort to undermine our Constitution. But the preliminary finding is that is precisely what Rudy did.
Just to play devil's advocate here for a moment, there are people who would say, well, the beauty of our system is that you can bring lawsuits for whatever you want, and those things, their standing, their merits will be adjudicated in the courtroom. So he should be free to just, bring forward any case that he wants to. Why should he be disbarred for bringing forward these cases?
The beauty of our system, Brian, is any litigant with a straight-faced lawsuit to file, a lawsuit that is supported by some admissible, credible, accurate evidence or information can absolutely bring suit. And you know what? We will fight for their right to bring a suit. But you cannot weaponize the system without any evidence, just in an attempt to gain some PR advantage by virtue of your filing a suit. That's what Rudy, Sidney Powell, and the rest of Trump's nefarious lawyers tried to do. They didn't have a suit to bring. They didn't have any facts supporting their assertion that there was massive fraud undermining the results of the 2020 election. But you know what? They needed something to sort of hang their hat on when they were claiming, it was stolen, therefore we have a reason to delay the certification of Joe Biden's win and hopefully come up with some kind of a scheme to install Donald Trump in the presidency for a second term. So, yes, everybody has the right to bring a lawsuit, but it has to be a lawsuit based on facts and evidence.
Yeah. And as opposed to just using the judicial system to basically weaponize it against our own laws that system is supposed to uphold. Okay, so you mentioned that this was, that there would be permanent findings as opposed to these preliminary findings. First of all, when would we find out whether these findings are permanent? And also, why is there a difference between preliminary and the final choice?
So, why are there lots of safeguards built into a system that is designed to address allegations of attorney misconduct? I'm going to sound a little cynical here and say it's because the system was put together by attorneys, right?
Yeah.
So attorneys bend over backwards to give other attorneys not just the benefit of the doubt, but every opportunity to make their case that they didn't do anything unethical, and then to contest any finding that, no, it looks like you did violate the rules of ethics. So, it is a long, drawn out procedure, and it's not over yet, because even if the DC Bar enters final findings, and we can talk in a minute about what the sanction might be, but even once they enter final findings, the attorney can still appeal that to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. And as we all know, Rudy, Trump, and others will appeal everything as long as they can to try to put off their ultimate day of reckoning.
So what is the ultimate, what's the last step in terms of being able to appeal? I mean, can this thing go before the Supreme Court?
No, in theory, could Rudy, if the appellate court rules against him, could Rudy try to find a way to file in the Supreme Court a petition for review of that, even if that avenue is technically open to him? And I'm not entirely sure it is, This is not the kind of thing an attorney discipline hearing. This is not the kind of thing that the Supreme Court would take up.
Okay. Okay. So you actually brought up a good question to ask, which is what are the range of the punishments that we could expect to see here? Obviously, disbarment, I believe, would be the most extreme, correct?
It would be the most extreme. And there can be any kind of sanctions like a reprimand, a temporary suspension. What I found really interesting in some of the reporting is even Rudy's lawyers were advocating for a lesser sanction. I'm not saying that's an admission of guilt, but once the attorney who has had this complaint filed against him and adjudicated against him, once his lawyers start to say, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't hit my guy so hard, that feels like a bit of a concession or a bit of a tell. But let me quote one more time the Bar Council attorney who is acting as the prosecutor in this case regarding the sanction that he's recommending to the DC Bar. Here's what Hamilton Fox said, quote, any lawyer that engages in this kind of misconduct, harming the country as this has done, has at least got to realize that his or her law license is at risk. And Hamilton Fox is seeking disbarment of Rudy Giuliani.
Okay. Now, what happens if Giuliani is disbarred in DC with regard to him being able to practice law elsewhere?
Well, remember, first it was the New York courts that took some incremental steps to hold Rudy accountable for some of his ethical misconduct. And then that got referred down to the DC Bar, and the DC Bar began the process of holding him accountable in DC. Once you have been disbarred in one jurisdiction, if you happen to hold a law license in other jurisdictions, those jurisdictions will act pretty promptly. And what they'll do is they'll just adopt the findings of the other jurisdiction. And, once you've been disbarred in one state, or in DC's case, a city, you are likely to lose your law license wherever you may be licensed to practice law.
I guess these other jurisdictions really wouldn't want to be the jurisdiction where they're still allowing somebody to practice law who was disbarred somewhere else. I guess that wouldn't really reflect too well on them. And so I guess they would have a vested interest in this case in moving swiftly, like you said, to make sure that he wouldn't be able to practice law there if he's such an issue, like a misconduct, a liability that other jurisdictions won't even allow him to practice.
Can you imagine New York saying, you know what, Rudy was disbarred in DC, but he's good enough for New York. Yeah, I don't see that happening.
So now, what impact does this have on other attorneys who practiced kind of alongside or in the same vein as Rudy Giuliani? Obviously, like the Sidney Powells of the world out there. Is there a precedent that's set for Giuliani that would maybe automatically trigger some look into these other Trump-aligned attorneys as far as the 2020 election being stolen was concerned?
Yeah, and remember, Sidney Powell and some of Trump's other nefarious lawyers have already been sanctioned for unethical conduct in other jurisdictions. But listen, I think this is a shot across the bow. If Rudy Giuliani, representing Donald Trump, trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election by weaponizing the courts, if that results in disbarment, I think that is a signal being sent to all of these other lawyers who really engaged in similar conduct, either as Rudy or even with Rudy Giuliani in some instances, that, y'all may be up next for ethical complaints and hearings.
When should we expect to hear a final decision from the DC Bar about this?
So the reporting is, and this is not a surprise, that it may take several weeks now for the process to continue to play out until we get a final ruling from the DC Bar Council. And if it is adverse to Rudy Giuliani, and it almost certainly will be, then, I would bet $1. That's my betting limit. I am not a high roller. I would bet $1 that Rudy will appeal it up the next level to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals.
Got it. Okay, well, let's finish off with this. Given that these violations are so egregious, and you read what I believe his name was Hamilton Fox, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, you read what Hamilton Fox said and how this was kind of like unprecedented for him to even come forward and say something like that. So given that these violations are so egregious, what message then would it send if Giuliani is disbarred?
Hopefully it begins to send the signal that the courts and the state bars will not stand for people like Rudy and Sidney Powell and the others weaponizing the court system to achieve something other than winning the case that they file. Like we've discussed, everybody's entitled to bring a case, but you have to have a good faith basis to believe it's a case that should be brought. It's a case that you might win. And most importantly, that you have some admissible evidence to offer the court. But if you're going to bring cases for the sheer PR value, hey, listen, a suit has been filed, therefore politics needs to take another path. That is something that hopefully will be deterred by the disbarment of Rudy Giuliani.
Great. Well, we'll leave it there. Obviously, we'll keep a close eye on this. For anybody who wants to continue following this story, make sure to follow both my channel and Glenn's channel. Both links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.